Welcome to Metapod, the podcast where we discuss operational execs and organizations that make and move stuff, and our common headaches, digital transformation, the forever labor shortage, and doing more with less. And now, the host of Metapod, Ron Crabtree.
It's Ron Crabtree here, back with another episode of Metapod, where we probe into those three common challenges, organizations, particularly around tangible goods, are facing. Digital transformation, digitization of work, the forever labor shortage, and the fact that we just have to do more with less of everything, freight, logistics, facilities, space, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm going to have James Cuthbert joining me here in a moment with Hencan, and he's out of the UK, so us Americans kind of like those British accents. And one of the things that he's going to really drill into is this notion around, why digital rollouts or digital transformation initiatives don't seem to stick. And this is a very serious problem because all the data and information I'm seeing out there suggests as much as 80% of the attempts to implement digital transformation in any industry is probably going to fail outright or never deliver what it's supposed to. So I'm really looking forward to what James is going to be sharing with us with more of a focus on the manufacturing side of things, if I'm correct. So with that, James, tell us a little bit about you.
Well, good to be with you, Ron. So, James Cuthbert, I'm an MD at Henken. We specialise in operational excellence and TPM programs, but it's all with a background of hearts and minds, so people, culture, technology, and really the business systems that make change stick. So predominantly work in FMCG and manufacturing, but I think we always say with this process and people, normally we can help. So aerospace, telecoms, we also do some work there.
Very good. Thank you. So you're going to help us understand, what are some of those warning signs of something you're going to call process debt. And I'm going to want you to very carefully define that for the audience so that we understand what you mean by that, right? For our factories and supply chain. And that the key role of that user experience, I like this one, right, that you're going to get into are leadership behavior and how do we engage people in the transformation to actually be successful. So with that, why don't you take us through, three different areas that you would offer as critical things we should assess, go out, ask questions about, dig into. How do we diagnose what we should be really looking at to be successful in digital transformation?
Yeah, okay. And if I start with process debt, I think people are more familiar with technical debt, but just to start there, technical debt is where you deploy a system or technology, but actually kind of what's going on behind the scenes is held together with like sticky tape and string. And so it's not a robust foundation to kind of sustain or kind of roll out with. And so when we talk about process debt, it's all the other things that aren't technology that you need to have for that sustainable change. So it's things like your operating systems, the behaviors, the way you make decisions, the systems, either hard or soft in the organization. And are they keeping pace with the digital transformation? And the easiest way of kind of boiling it right down is kind of most people build the product or build the digital system. So that's the tool set. They train it to people. So that's the skill set. But actually, have they changed the mindset of the organization? So the process debt is if you haven't taken the organization through these other kind of changes in the different systems that it's alluded to, so it makes the digital rollout stick. And it can come up in lots of different ways, and that's kind of what we'll dive into. But clearly, kind of if you haven't joined all the pieces together, what you'll see is that digital rollout either not delivering the outcomes you expected, so as you say, kind of 80% can fail, or you actually find that you kind of end up with like half of one system and half of another, as people kind of start to try and do different things. So if we look at the three ways that you can start to diagnose this, the first is around what I would say mismatched mindset and adoption. So when you go out into your organization, are you seeing teams using the tools as intended? Okay. You can see this with a non-digital system as well. Kind of every time you roll out a visual management board, does it have the data on that people want and need to make decisions? So the kind of terminology you might find is what we call kind of grey IT. So do teams use the systems as it was designed and intended, or do they still have manual logs? Are they kind of using personal judgments? And this kind of the next place you see this is with managers. So do managers trust and act on the system generated data? And it's a really easy thing to see, especially if you've got an organization that's using any kind of lean or operational excellence or TPM system. Managers using data. And if you went into the system, the IT system or the digital system you're using, is the data that they're talking about the same as the data in the system? And we see this all the time. Kind of different people using different versions of the data. In the UK, we've got the NHS, and I worked with them for a number of years in different places. They could run the same analysis and come up with a different answer every time, because just the platform wasn't stable. So if managers are using the data in the ways intended, can they make decisions based on that? Then that's good. If you see that there's different arguments about data sets or people are using intuition, it's a signal that maybe the rollout hasn't gone the way that you expected. And finally,
Could you share a specific story,
yeah, yeah,
a granular story? In this, don't disclose anything. You shouldn't, but give an exact example of the process. Maybe it was planning, scheduling, invoicing, or shop order management, whatever. Just an exact process where you looked at it and were determining you had some debt.
yeah. So I'll give you a couple. So we've got one that I was speaking to the other day. It was around the use of agency spend and using contractors. And there were 3 points of view in the organization. You had one manager or one kind of functional head, so like a VP, that was basically saying, "Oh, we only use kind of $1 million a year worth of agency spend." Someone else was saying it's half that, and the CFO and the finance officer was saying, "Well, I can see the numbers, the ledger, and I think it's twice that." So just 3 people who are right at the top of the organization, very different views. One from a manufacturing organization in the detail, and was we were working with an organization looking at a production line, and we'd gone in specifically to look at this one machine, and they'd got like a digital umbrella system that was pulling data out. And when you looked at that, you would think this machine was failing miserably. When we're on the line, this machine was actually doing perfectly fine, but the machine either side of it were the problems. But when operators were coding, they were coding lazily, you could say, to the other machines. And so for us, we're going in trying to look at the OE of this particular machine, and that's not the root cause. But the reason that was particularly interesting was because of the politics around it. So the IT system had been deemed a successful rollout, so we couldn't question the data. So you get into this kind of emperor's new clothes scenario where, it's not worth kind of putting your hand up to say this isn't working, because it opens up a can of worms to do with kind of the benefits case of a previous rollout. So if you're the maintenance man or the maintenance woman, and you're kind of trying to look at what to fix, you're misguided, you're going down the wrong path. But also, if you're trying to kind of justify a change program and you're trying to say, like, it's not that machine, it's something else, someone else is waving some data and saying, no, I disagree.
That's interesting. So I think if I could paraphrase all that, it's like, is there one version of truth? In other words, from a process debt perspective, if I can get many different answers to the same question, that says this process is not very robust. It wasn't well thought out, or we're too reliant on human beings, or we're relying on behavior stuff that is going to blow up the process. Would that be an accurate assessment of that?
Yeah, spot on. And you'll see that, like I say, not necessarily in the IT because that's not got any people in it, but in the meetings, in the daily startup meetings where people are disagreeing on, like you said, that one version of truth and who's kind of right.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. I'm sorry for interrupting. I don't want
That's
to run you.
spirits. I think you hit the nail on the head with that one. And I think the next one then is kind of um, rather just the grey IT. Um, are there kind of complete parallel systems in operation? So it's the extension of that mistrust in the data, that one version of the truth. And we always talk when we're kind of doing lean or process mapping about the hidden factory. And you see on paper what should be going on, and then when you get your brown paper out and you value stream map it and you speak to people, the hidden factory emerges, and there's a whole separate set of activities that are going on in the organization, in the factory, and that's how things really are.
Hey, James, I have to interrupt there. You said something there very important that some in the audience may not be familiar with. It's this term called the hidden factory.
Yeah.
And I'm going to paraphrase kind of how I like to explain it. But this is what the process should be doing. In other words, this is what we want to have happen, A, B, C, D, and then F and G, and this is the outcome. But then when you go back and you actually attach yourself to the transaction or the piece of the data or the decision being made, and you literally walk it through as it actually happens in the real world, you find, oh, wait a minute, we get here and then, oh, we're missing something. We have to draw it over here. We have to come over here, rework it, bring the information back, try to continue. And so what you're talking about there would be the unintended activities that were not designed or thought about up front, but they're just happening. So they're hidden. They're an invisible sink of time
Yeah.
and energy and a source of all kinds of process debt problems. Would that be
Yeah.
accurate?
Absolutely. And some of those are designed in at the start accidentally. Some happen as kind of the world changes. So, someone leaves, a new piece of kit comes in and the world evolves and the process didn't. And often we find the people that own the processes aren't necessarily the people that run the processes anymore in some organizations. And the same thing happens if we do a digital rollout. Normally someone sat in a room somewhere with someone from a software firm or someone from the technical team and worked out a process flow or said these are the stages and not engaged the right people or missed the trick or it was right but the system gets rolled out and actually that workflow for some reason doesn't work. And so people are finding workarounds. And I was with an organization yesterday that have just literally had a new ERP system roll out. And of all the things that wasn't working and the concessions process wasn't functioning. So, suddenly you've got this whizzy system that people can't use, but you still got to deliver. So they find workarounds, they find shortcuts, and some of those are maybe what they deem as easier, but actually it's introducing risk into the system. It's that classic kind of lean pokey oak. So where we kind of built in error proofing. If we don't do that in the right way, we can find process inefficiencies, data inaccuracies, variability. So again, the thing to look for here is if you walk the shop floor, you walk your process line, can you see that workflow firsthand and just do some good old fashioned investigation? Or kind of the lagging indicator is, are you seeing inefficiencies, variation where you weren't expecting it, which is kind of like it's too late it's happened, but you can use that to go upstream and diagnose kind of where the IT or digital system isn't doing what you designed it to do or thought it would do.
All right. So if I'm the executive that's not really familiar with these processes, maybe I'm on the board of directors or not normally my job to worry about it. So I'm kind of looking for, show me the evidence and the data that would indicate we've looked granularly at the actual processes, what's supposed to happen and what's really happening. And, there's the happy path of what we want to have happen in this process, but then here's the true path. And you're just looking for evidence, to what degree do those things diverge? And
Yeah.
do we even know that? Can we put a label on that, somehow measure that so that we can prioritize where to focus improvements in the future in the process?
Yeah, and if you're that leader, again, some people absolutely love it. It's where they spend most of their time. For others, it may be for geographical reasons or whatever harder to do. You've got to go and see it yourself. And so there's a kind of we always had the queen, now the king in this country, and the joke was the queen thinks buildings just smell of fresh paint because everywhere she goes, it's a royal visit. And if you're a leader in an organization, you've got to be able to go to your workplace without it being like a royal visit. And you aren't seen as like a threat to the operators. And it's like it's normal that you're there because if that's the case, you can start to see it. Because I think the kind of short answer is where's the pain that you're feeling? And if you can understand where the pain is, can you go and see it yourself and understand it? Don't get it second hand or third hand. Go and speak to the people who are experiencing that pain and again, like this is where we tip into kind of are the leadership team able to do that? Are they kind of confident or brave enough to do it? Because sometimes that could be an issue in terms of if they're going to get some flack or whatever. But also skilled up to see what they need to see when they get there, which again comes back to the kind of good old fashioned like lean thinking or lean lenses about seeing waste and so on. So you can't do this through a report. You've got to go and see it yourself.
Yeah, I really like that. One of the exercises that I like to do with teams, and I'm betting you probably use something similar, Before we even jump in, I'd like to start with the brainstorming session of, you bring in the subject matter experts to do the work, you bring in some of their customers, maybe you're bringing in some of the suppliers for the process, and you let the people that record of the process just talk about what makes me crazy and just get a flip chart out, right? And just let them talk about the things they find frustrating. I get frustrated when this happens. It seems like I don't get the information I need. It seems like I'm reworking this a lot. And you just listen to that very carefully. And you honor that is the reality of the people that are living in that process every day. And then later, when you go back and map the process, you're looking for, okay, so tell me, you talked about this pain point. Where in the process does that manifest? Exactly. And then using that to go back then and try to quantify and understand root cause for some of those issues. So have you tried that technique or is that part of your process?
Yeah, definitely. And I think probably a bit crass, but we talk about, being sick on the table. It's like, can we get everything out there and find out those things? And again, like if you have it, the beauty is then how we use data to sift out the red herrings and find the root causes and the points of cause. Because so often the pain they feel is a symptom, and the real investigation is finding out, okay, what is it? And like I said, kind of just now, kind of, everyone's really upset with engineering and the change process. Well, it's actually because there's something in the change process that's broken, that means that they're kind of, people are getting stuck there. But everyone just thinks that engineering are being kind of awkward, and it's not necessarily that. So we've got to get into the workflow.
That's a great example.
Cool. And then the third one kind of links on from this is as well now, in terms of where do we see resistance to change or lack of engagement. So as I said before, kind of, I might have trained someone in the new system, but if I haven't explained to them why they're doing it in a certain way, they're not bought into doing it any differently. It's just more work or painful or not what they've done before. So there's a massive piece around engaging workforce, and I mean, I've been guilty of this in the past. I've been part of SAP rollout where there was a huge team looking at training needs analysis, looking at the business change piece, and when you're kind of you're not aware of that stuff. You see it and you think, oh, that's a massive waste of time and effort. But when you really think, I've got to get every single user to change their mindset about why we're using this system, and kind of cross out all the frictions and get rid of all the issues that they might have, that's a huge undertaking because everyone's slightly different. So the kind of question you can kick the tires on are, if you look at the training material to do with the system, and how much did it focus on behavioral change? I mean, the cliche for me is someone goes, "Oh, I emailed everyone," and they didn't do it. It's like, well, yeah, you emailed them. So like, if you haven't spoken to them, you haven't engaged. It's kind of like, I email people, and we're all full of inboxes everywhere of like unread emails of things we were meant to do. And so if we aren't kind of first off designing the system to be an enabler for the workforce and the people using it, then that's not, that's the easiest thing to have done. But if it can't make their lives easier, we have to explain why the process is the process and focus on that kind of change. And so if you haven't done that, if more change is coming, you'll see more resistance. If you're maybe cascading goals and performance measures, you'll see kind of people check out or resist because they don't see either the value in the system or they don't believe the system can help them to deliver those outcomes.
Yeah, so what you're describing there is, you're taking the care to build a bit of a burning platform to make a change. I use a real simple model when I talk about being successful in sustainable change. It's discomfort with current state, coming up with a factor for that times how clear our vision is of future state and understanding what's going to be like in the future, and then do we have the skills to actually be effective. But if there's no discomfort, if we haven't built a burning platform, we haven't listened and put it in the context of the people that are affected so they see it as important, look out. We're one third underwater already, right? One third of the formula is probably close to zero, right? In terms of our chance of success. So I think that's what you're really getting at is making sure we built, a case for change.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, there's loads of ways of doing it, and everyone's different. So, for some people and to some situations, we have to explain like the pain we're avoiding, or the opportunity that we get from doing this change. So, again, this is where you have to get down to engaging operational teams at almost a personal level because everyone's wired differently. So, if you feel you are really significant in the current system and you've got authority, and suddenly this, AI thing's coming in or something's automating your job, there's a huge threat to you personally, and not just in your livelihood, but your significance and your ego. So what's in it for them? Likewise, if someone's really up for variety and they love doing different things and they feel the system's going to box them off in some way and put them in a box or a role, then they might resist it. The opposite is true. If you can sell the system as giving them way more flexibility in their role and opportunity for growth, they might love it. So you've got to really think about kind of where people are as individuals, and that's where the behavioral stuff is huge when you're doing any kind of change, digital or otherwise.
All right. Well, you've done a fantastic job of kind of giving us three different core areas to look at, the mismatched mindset to the adoption of the tools, workarounds, parallel systems, and then understanding how resistance and a lack of engagement can really be a roadblock. And you help us understand how to examine it and ask questions to kind of diagnose it. So let's assume, yeah, we've got those challenges. James, what do we do to solve for those problems?
Yeah. If we start with the kind of mismatch and maybe the clunkiness of the tool, this is something that I think you can have a whole separate conversation on, like digital versus analog systems. And people love pen and paper and so on, but and we've got to make digital tools frictionless, so they have to feel like part of the operating system. And like we have that in technology. I think like I'm an Apple user, I know there's Android out there, but whatever it is, your device has taken on so many different roles in your life, and some of them are seamless. And it's like we need to put the same attention into the digital tools. So if I've got a daily startup meeting, if I've got like a tiered system, kind of are those tools seamlessly integrated? Wherever there's friction, we need to eradicate that friction. So if I've got to manually move between systems, if it's really difficult to like zoom into a chart on a kind of digital display board, if there's like a lag in data, all of these things are barriers to technological adoption. So we have to make sure that we, wherever possible, can like remove those excuses or those barriers. The second part around digital adoption then is around leaders, and not just the technical team, but all the leaders in the organization can talk about the benefits of the system because they understand the benefits of the system and they've gone on the journey themselves. And I always say, kind of, when you're doing these kind of programs, there's two leaps of faith. Someone, normally the senior leadership team, bought this and was sold this or decided to do it, and they've gone on their journey. But then you've got to take kind of your middle managers and frontline managers on the journey too. So ultimately, they're the ones that drive cultural change. So your middle managers, your team leaders, have to be equipped to take their teams on the journey, understand kind of the benefit of the system, not just be able to use it, but explain why this is beneficial, why we're doing it this particular way. So training has to be just as much about navigating the system as it is just using that in a kind of like, let's show you how to do that transaction. No, how do you kind of use it across the whole day and connect those dots together as a system?
So I've got a question for you. One of the things around good change management, organizational change management, is this notion of having some kind of a a steering committee, or some kind of guidance group, and then using something that looks like a formal charter or chartering document of some sort where we kind of state, this is what we're doing, this is what good's going to look like, who's involved, what are we going to measure, what are our roadblocks, et cetera. That's a lot of rigor, right? And so do you have like a cut point of, do I always want to have a steer co and have some kind of a charter, or does it depend on certain conditions? I'd like you to offer your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I would say you always need it, and I think the thing that probably varies is the scale of it. So I'd say how I would define it is you need your steer code to make decisions, but below that there's a solution design authority. So they have to own the integrity of the whole system. So that's where you've got like an integrated work team. So engineering, maintenance, operators, whoever needs to be in that, and they're the ones that have to have the arguments. And I say there's no solutions, only trade-offs. So it's never going to be perfect. But how can they get to a point of recommending something up to the leadership team to make a decision? So their best interest is um, what's going to be the best for this, for our workforce, for our customers, for operations, for efficiency. And so wrapped around that, most people have a PMO, but the thing I always kind of say is you need a transformation management office as well. that are looking at benefits and outcomes. So I'd say you need that solution design authority, and the scale would say who's on it and how big is it.
All right. Awesome. Sorry for interrupting. You really kind of caught my interest there.
Yeah, yeah, it's a really hit a passion point. Um, and that kind of tips to the second one around workarounds of parallel working. So to that point, like that solution design authority have to be really tuned in to what's called UX UI, so the user experience and the user interface. So you again, like rather than just like we're talking about seamless connection, how easy is it to use the system? So we talk about this from a lean point of view. We talk about motion waste, and motion waste can be big and walking between places, but it can just be small in terms of using a computer system and lots of different click-through screens. So again, you'll find some organizations have solved some problems with multiple systems with a single user logon page, where you go through one place. But that whole experience has to make it as easy as possible to use that digital platform. Great example would be if you've got a TPM platform where you're kind of you're tagging things. They start off as paper tags, and literally we're wrapping paper tags or plastic tags around things. If we digitize that, that's great, but everyone now needs access to those workbooks or those iPads or whatever we're using as a technology. And so we've introduced something that might make it more difficult to use it. So um, putting great attention into those friction points and making sure that we've tested things with people is really important. So I did a SAP, supported a SAP rollout years ago now, and lots and lots of attention was put into very early on engaging the field force that were going to be using the handheld devices. Because if ever there was a group that were going to kind of torpedo something because they didn't like what they were being given, they were the group, but they were ultimately the end users. If it was going to be a miserable rollout, it was like, let's upset them and not give them kind of the right tools. Actually, if we can show them this is going to make life easier, then that's half the battle. So kind of simplification wherever possible, removing those friction points and engaging people in the design through that solution design authority, whether it's like the process or the hard assets and hardware.
Okay. Very good.
And then again, kind of you can see these points are all linked together. That resistance for change and lack of engagement. Some of this comes down to how are we reinforcing the technology. So we could now talk about gamification and how we kind of gamify a system. But the other thing is around how we tracking adoption. So when you roll out an IT system, some kind of terms that are used are called like critical care or hypercare. So there's this period of time where it's a very, very fragile system. And at that point, people are mainly focusing on the technical issues in the system and snagging the system. But we also need to look at the kind of the process side, like we said. So anything that underlines that process debt that we've been talking about. So we've got to look at process adherence. We've got to look at making sure that teams can identify snags. If you're very lucky, do continuous improvement to tackle things themselves. But there's an expression, kind of, you defend what you build. So we have to make sure that kind of adoption isn't like green tick, we've trained the team, let's move on. It's actually probably 6, 9, 12 months later where we're really scrutinizing, are we sticking to this? Are we tracking who's logging on? Are we tracking how we're using that data? Can we almost tell stories about how good the system's been to support better decisions and better outcomes and reinforce it through narrative? And again, continue to engage teams in that change process so they feel ownership. And whether that's like version 2, version 3, or being in pilot areas for certain technologies and functions, you need to make sure that they don't feel passive in the journey. They are part of it. Because ultimately, if you've done it for the right reasons, the digital platform should be making their life easier in doing that job, in adding value.
Okay. Awesome. All right. Very good. So you provided a lot of grist here for our audience with respect to what should we be looking at? Why are we looking at that? Why is that important? How do we gauge, the degree of disconnect in these areas? And then some really good practical, what do you do to close those gaps and make sure you're getting the results you should? If folks want to get in touch with you, talk about this more, learn more about what you guys do at Hencan, how do they get in touch with you?
Yeah, so henken.com for the website. If you really want to come to me personally, it's first name dot last name at companyname.com. Also on LinkedIn. So James Cuthbert, and I'll open to any of those channels if you want to get in touch with me.
All right. Nice job, James. Thanks for joining me.
No problem. Really good to speak to you.
Thank you for joining Metapod. For requests on topics or to ask questions, you can connect with Ron Crabtree 3 ways: via email at metapod@metaexperts.com, via LinkedIn, or by calling him directly at 734-425-1455, extension 103. Lastly, if you love the show, please consider leaving a 5-star review on your favorite podcast app. We truly appreciate all your support.